I was born in Sudan. My family is sort of a mix of Sudanese, a bit of Egyptian, some Turkish and Moroccan. We moved to Australia, moved to Brisbane when I was just before I turned 2. One of the sort of big moments as a young person or as a child was when I chose to wear the hijab. It's a very small part of being a Muslim. It's a very small part of expressing faith, of being faithful, of existing as a woman. But because it's very visual and because of the way the world likes to police women and their image, it's usually a huge point of discussion. That was a line in the sand, which meant that I went from being sort of an innocent child in the eyes of people, or as I like to say, a brown person who wore slightly weird clothing, to the face of all that was evil, right? Unfortunately. And that wasn't something that I really totally understood, but definitely defined me in the sense that all of a sudden people now demanded things from me that I had to either reject the premise of completely or learn how to engage with. And so over time, I sort of looked at it, and particularly because of the guidance of my mum, looked at it as an opportunity to sort of educate rather than to sort of be a victim of that. But what I found actually, so when I think of my sort of growth as a woman, all through university, I was one of a very few number of women, right? Feminism was for, the chicks who couldn't handle hanging out with the boys. And there was this real well, I can hang out with the boys, I can handle it, I can whatever. And a real sense of pride about being one of the boys, not being one of the others. And I remember my mum constantly saying, she was like, why are you trying to act like a man? I'm like, Mum, I'm not. Get off my case. And she was always pushing this. She was like, remember that you're not a man. You don't want to be a man. Like, what is your problem? And I just couldn't understand where she was coming from. And then I got out to industry. I got out to working on the rigs, where I was the only woman quite often on the rig. I was working not with men my age, but with men of all sorts of different ages. And different kind of levels of acceptance of women in the field, and different kind of views on things like feminism and so on. And see, I had thought that me being Muslim or me being brown was going to be a bigger issue, but it was definitely the gender piece. What was given credibility and legitimacy in my world was, the bloke who's the drilling supervisor, who's, speaks a certain way and has a certain type of respect because of this, this, and this. But the reality is that, and this is the thing that I realized on the rigs, that I would always be seen as a woman. And often be seen as a woman first, then as an engineer. In order for me to be seen as an engineer first and a woman second, or just an engineer regardless of my gender, I would have to actually undo my gender. And that's what I was doing by trying to be one of the boys. So sort of getting to the point where I acknowledged that I wasn't the same as everybody else, and had to start figuring out what it meant to be a woman in a real male-dominated world, what it meant to be a woman generally, and be okay with the strength of a woman being different, recognizing that we're equal but not the same, and how to communicate that. That was definitely a huge turning point in terms of figuring out who I was as a woman in the world. And I think that's still something I'm figuring out. The interesting thing is the age that I am now. So I'm 25, turning 26 this year in 2017. It's up until this point, I could pretty much not have to worry about traditional gender roles. Okay, yes, in the subject choice and the work choice, yes. But nobody would say, well, you need to be thinking about this as a woman or whatever. But really now, all my friends are getting married, all my friends are having kids, and the conversations have now turned from being, well, what can you do as an individual, to actually much more traditional, not only in the sort of Sudanese community or the Muslim community, but also in the sort of mainstream Anglo-Australian community. If you think about sort of culture and expectation and so on, it's totally understandable, because value for women has always come from, your ability to be a mother and your ability to hold a family. As young Muslim woman of color, not only am I facing this sort of internal battle of, challenging family expectations and community expectations of what it means to be a good Sudanese girl or a good Muslim girl, which I think is different to what society thinks, but there is still that expectation of having kids and being a mother and doing the right thing and so on. So I have the internal pressure, but then I also have the external pressure because everybody else is like, well, we need to save you, right? Or like constantly surprised at the fact that I know how to say things and that I have an opinion. Like I remember one of the blokes at work being like, you're really not sheltered for a Muslim woman at all, are you? And I'm like, what did you expect? Like, you know, we're normal humans as well, and there's like 700 million of us, so there's going to be a range within that. Like, and so you're sort of facing a battle on two fronts, and so there really isn't much safe ground, really. Like, if I go out into the mainstream world and sort of say, well, these are the battles that I'm facing within the community, they'll be like, aha, told you that you needed saving. And then, you know, you come back into your community and you want to sort of be supported and you want to be like, hey, look, the people outside are saying this about us. And some people are like, well, yeah, you know, it is true. You should be doing this and this and this. And this sort of real frustration for me that I truly believe that Islam is like actually quite feminist. It was super radical when it first came out. You know, it gave women rights that like Europeans dreamed about and didn't really get until like 100, 150 years ago. And yet there is still, you know, that's butting up against tradition, butting up against culture. And for your external person, they don't see the difference between culture and religion. They don't separate those, and because they are very interlinked and also difficult if you're not sort of involved. And so it's just really constantly battling to define yourself, and to do that outside the sort of the framework that everybody else wants to put for you. But it's not always that easy. It's been a really interesting thing because I think a lot of people look at my career and think, oh, Yassmin, everything's gone well for you. You get all these gigs because you're the brown chick, you're the Muslim chick, you tick all the diversity boxes. You know, I understand where they're coming from, and I definitely acknowledge that some doors have opened because I do tick a lot of diversity boxes. But rest assured that the system is not geared to help me out. I've never gotten a job through an interview process. Every job I've gotten in my entire life have been through personal connections. Because people don't look at people like me and think I can do drilling, right? People don't look at people like me and think I'm a great race car designer, right? It's this concept of, you know, women being hired on experience rather than potential. People don't look at me and automatically assume, if they don't know anything about me, they don't automatically assume I can do anything, really. And so I have to have people vouch for me. I have to have people back me up. I have to have a network of sponsors and mentors and people that are going to be like, yeah, Yassmin can do it. And they tend to be older white men because those are the people that the world listens to. I'm really conscious of the fact that I do drilling, engineering, and I do a whole bunch of stuff on the side, but the drilling has always been my main job, and I've always worked super, super, super hard at it to make sure that no one could ever say you weren't committed enough, right? It's that concept of, you know, women have yet earned the right to be mediocre. To change, people will be uncomfortable. So we have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have to understand that the only way that learning and growth happens is when people are uncomfortable. The question is, how do we push people into enough discomfort that they change, but not enough that they go into shame, right? Because what we often find is that when you call things out in a certain way, or when you shame people, they will immediately become defensive. They will immediately turn off. You will no longer be listened to. So we also have to think about how we create safe spaces. Now, it's exhausting. I totally acknowledge that it's super exhausting that we have to handhold people into enlightenment. But the reality is that if we don't do it, no one will. Never let other people's expectations limit what is possible for you. Because I think everybody, like by and large, people will tell you advice that is a projection of their own lives, right? People see things from their own perspectives, and people are much faster to say, no, you can't do that, than yes, you can. So rather than adding your voice to that, back yourself. Never, never let other people's expectations limit what is possible. Because you have no idea, and that's super exciting.